Okay, dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You are watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is Talk to OBN Spotlight. Today, we'll be talking about HR 6600 draft bill of the U.S. Congress. I joined by John Philpott, an international lawyer who sat on Rwandan genocide case, and international political strategist Asqual Tefri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
Good day.
All right. As I have said, we'll be talking about this HR 6600 draft bill, and it is an allegation of genocide and crime against humanity. And John Philpott sat on Rwandan genocide, and you know what genocide means. And how do you see this allegation?
Well, it's a tall order to explain it simply. However, this bill is an attempt by the US to control Ethiopia by making allegations, very emotional allegations, not based on fact. And you will recall, we're now in March, last year, when the fight was going on above all in Tigray, and there was massive killings by the Tigrayan forces, the US didn't say anything about genocide, except they criticized the government when they fought back. So how can you delegate or allow this government in the US to sit on you as a judge when we know their bias? Now that's one way to show that you cannot trust them. There are many other aspects to this bill which we should discuss.
Okay, let me go to Asqual. You're closely working with Ethiopian American Civic Council. You're a public relation there. And what are you doing to combat this HR 6600? Because it's a very threatening and harsh and dangerous move of the US to impose sanction on sovereign nation.
Yeah, thank you, Adis, for having us. Yes, that's a great question. If you recall, I think you and I have spoken about this in the past. Within 1 year, the United States Congress managed to write about 4 different threatening resolutions to Ethiopia, basically supporting the cause of TPLF terrorist group and with an intention to hurt and pose sanction against Ethiopia. Now, this one is a little bit different because the resolution 6600, I call it resolution 666 really, is written by the Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Malinowski, and a couple of them that sponsored the bill are definitely TPLF supporters. You know, you know why this bill is supporting TPLF, because TPLF cohorts took it out to Twitter the next day in digital media marketing, galvanizing everybody to support this bill. We know there is a lobbyist currently supporting Egypt and TPLF that brought this resolution to the forefront. So that's what the resolution is all about. It will sanction Ethiopia. It will demand unfettered access to investigators. So I don't like that word unfettered anymore. It should disappear from dictionary because they've been using it recklessly. But how can a sovereign country allow unfettered access? That means unrestricted. That means the government will not have any say as to how these investigations are conducted within these war zones. And it's designed to benefit TPLF. And this is why we're fighting it.
The UN Humanitarian Commission and Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission jointly conducted a research before a couple of months and revealed that no crime to this level is committed. No crime of genocide is committed, they've said. But now the UN is about to send 3 investigators to investigate the crime. You see, what does it mean by it's a paradox. They did and conducted this research for a couple of months and revealed as no genocide has happened. What is the intention behind this? First, John.
Once again, we are in the realm of intervention in the internal affairs of Ethiopia. And this bill, and because this committee, which has been formed allegedly independently of the US, is obviously a mirror reflection of the requirements in the bill. It's one hand and the other hand marching together. And so this committee is interesting. In the bill, they talk about reporting to the State Department. Well, one of the key people on the bill is a professor of law who's a consultant to the State Department, Stephen Ratner. And the lead chair of this committee is Fatou Bensouda, who has an African name. She's from Gambia, but she was prosecutor at the International Criminal Court for, I think, 8 years. And I actually knew her before, around 20 years ago, a little bit less, 17, 18 years ago, when she was prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, working ironically with someone from the State Department, Stephen Rapp. Now, you will recall the International Criminal Court only charged Africans. So they're really concerned about so-called genocide in Africa, which is a misnomer. It's not the right way to look at the problems. And one striking example of Mrs. Bensouda's work is the work with Ivory Coast, avec Côte d'Ivoire. And they kidnapped Mr. Bagbo in 2011 and Mr. Blegude. And they charged him and tried to find him guilty of crimes. And halfway through the trial, it's a bit like in the US, but when you have a criminal trial, at the end of the prosecution's evidence, the judges said there's no case to meet. We can throw it out. It's not serious. She procrastinated and pushed to try and maintain the charges. So here is a man taken out of politics by force, and he was removed from this political life and detained for a long time. And she pushed and refused to recognize that there was no case. So she just wouldn't give up. Now, I could say a little bit more about my experience in international criminal law. I don't know whether you want me to explain that now. The third woman on the team is Mrs. Betty Morungi, Karia Betty Morungi, and she's Kenyan. Now, we all know you can't identify somebody by their nationality. I'm Canadian. You don't know what I think, but you can look at what they've done. And she worked in Rwanda. And now, all these issues are complicated. You cannot treat them in a simplistic manner. However, our experience at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, it was that it was a biased court. It took the horrors of the war of Rwanda and only charged the losers of the war, and a huge propaganda effort about genocide. I don't think genocide is the best word to describe what happened in Rwanda, but it was a horrible situation. They only charged the losers of the war. And who won the war? Paul Kagame, associated with the US, in fact, and he's now president. He's got president for life virtually. And so, and you know, I don't like to generalize too much, but you will note one of the strongest supporters of the TPLF is Paul Kagame. And so you must mistrust, in my opinion, Western investigations of Africa. In your case, the country which you know about, which is Ethiopia. And I know a little bit about Ethiopia, but I certainly know a lot about Western intervention in Africa and in legal circles. You can also, for example, I was on the Kenya case where I was representing somebody on close to Mr. Kenyatta, and the case was just built up by Western human rights organizations, and it was shoddy evidence. And we all know that Kenya managed to get through this case, and it was thrown out. And it wasn't serious. It was just not serious evidence. It's not like if, well, I'll make a joke, but if I go home, go to work tonight in the morning, and I'm arrested for drinking and driving, well, I should be charged. If it's true, I should be charged for it. They have to have evidence, though. Whether we understand what that means. They have blood tests, or they have breathing tests, or they have symptoms. But these cases at the international courts have been rather dubious, if to say the least. And but a lot of propaganda about them, and you heard about them, and you've all heard the horror stories of the Rwandan genocide. And the guilty people, well, most of the leaders were acquitted eventually. Most of the leaders of the political leaders of the majority in the country were acquitted. They never found a conspiracy. I bet if you said, was that planned, that genocide? You would all think, yes, it was planned. Well, no planning was ever. They spent $1 billion on the tribunal and found no planning. And it's really interesting to accuse Africans of genocide. History tells us that whether it's genocide or massive ethnic injustice, slavery and colonialism, Belgium in the Congo, the slave trade, the British in Kenya with the Mau Mau and the use of force to prevent Kenya from becoming independent, the Algerian War, which lasted for 8 years. Who was guilty of the major crimes? Obviously, it's the colonialist West, which has the blood on their hands, whether the term is genocide or crimes against humanity or horrible crimes committed by an occupation. This is what we're talking about.
Thank you, Asqua.
Your country.
Would you like to add something about this question?
Yeah, what John described, the three, and he does have a lot of experience with ICC, International Criminal Court, is that these three that are selected that you just mentioned, one of them the US and the other person from Gambia, right? They're all supporters of the West, and so they're going to be impartial. They're going to support what the West is going to want them to support. And this is why I believe, my assessment, the whole system is corrupt. This is why Ethiopia shouldn't allow access. Because if you, I think you mentioned it, that in February 16 of this year, Sarah Jackson, Deputy Regional Director of East Africa, Amnesty International reported Tigrayan forces have shown utter disregard for fundamental rules of international humanitarian law, which all parties have committed atrocities, including rape, summary killings, looting, hospitals. So but the connection with the so-called investigators, independent investigators, looks like the United States is working in connection with the UN. It looks like they're strategizing. You know, they, as soon as, you know, they write this HR resolution, pretty soon something happens in the United Nations. And so they sidestep all these humanitarian abuses that were undertaken by TPLF purposely. So in terms of collaborating with the UN, I see the West has dominance over that. And like John described it, if you allow access with people that are going to be influenced by the Western world, we're doomed to fail. They're going to bring that genocide charge against the Ethiopian government. So, which takes us back to this resolution, which favors TPLF and tries to hurt the Ethiopian government. The section 5.7 of the bill specifically will sanction, will isolate and deny the country international loans, financial help, development and security assistance, unless the government of Ethiopia, quote unquote, negotiate on whose term, we don't know. It looks like on the TPLF's term, because the West looks like they want to resuscitate the insurrectionists that declared war against Ethiopia. So this is something we really need to pay careful attention of the coordinated effort by the West and the United Nations against the Ethiopian government.
Asqual, you've showed us your stand about these three individuals. The government shouldn't allow them to come to Ethiopia and study or conduct a research whether a crime against humanity is conducted or undergone. What is your side, or what's your opinion? Does the government has that leverage to resist them not to come to Ethiopia? Mr. John.
Well, I'm in a sense, you're lucky that I'm an outsider, because I can apply my theories of governance. When there is an uprising, a government is sovereign and has the right to apply the law, use its army, its police forces, to put down the rebellion, either by force, by persuasion. Now, your country is sovereign, and I understand that the will of your people is to remain, to not break up into pieces. You want to remain a single country. So the government may have to use force, because there was a war, and actually your government won the war, although maybe there's some faltering, but I'm not going to comment on. But this law requires negotiation. This law requires unfettered access to humanitarian. Now, we know about shipping guns in humanitarian vehicles. This is untenable. The government has the right to inspect and control every aspect of its territory, every inch of its territory. And this is why this law would give the right of the United States to tell the government how to manage the uprising which you have and the ethnic violence you have. And it's in other areas, not only in Tigray. But you did have an election last year. One party won, and it's the government to decide, and not the United States, which has its own interests, geopolitical interests. I'll come back to some other aspects of the law in further comments.
Asqual, the HR 6600 Ethiopia Stabilization, Peace and Democracy Act. The bill was introduced on February 4, 2022, co-sponsored by the U.S. Congress, main Michelle McCool and Grigory Mix. If enacted, it authorizes sanction against those who are perpetrated the conflict and suspend security and financial assistance to the Ethiopian government. It would also require the U.S. To oppose loans by international agencies such as World Bank and International Monetary Fund to Ethiopia and Eritrea. Do you think the bill is relevant with the fact on the ground in Ethiopia?
That's a very good question. Republican Malinowski, he's a chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, he's a chairperson. He's not just a regular congressman, he's a powerful person. In terms of your question, what is the reality in the ground in Ethiopia? From what we can assess, it's a little bit confusing to me personally, because the Biden administration is playing two sides of the game in a way. On one side, they say, we want to call Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, we want to formalize relationship with Ethiopia. And so this release of the prisoners that everybody was upset about, all these things, it looks like the government of Ethiopia did what the US wanted it to do in a way. I mean, the Ethiopian government halted Ethiopia's defense forces from entering Tigray. They provide and allowed humanitarian aid in Tigray. In fact, the blockage wasn't by the Ethiopian government, the blockage was by TPLF. They provided full access to Tigray, except, for the areas in Tigray that are controlled by TPLF. They also lifted a wartime state of emergency 3 months earlier. They also, I mentioned, released prisoners, which has become a big controversy. And also they established a reconciliation commission to begin a national dialogue. On the backdrop of this, they wrote the HR 66. I call it 66 because it's like 666. It is extremely harsh against Ethiopia. It is a resolution that, if passed, will take Ethiopia back 200 years. It will be like Cuba, Venezuela. Not only would it punish Ethiopia and impose so many sanctions, but we will go further and punish the countries that support Ethiopia. In fact, it mentions them on the bill. Those 5 countries like Russia, China, Iran, UAE, and Turkey.
Okay, John, would you like to add something about what Aswal has said?
Well, sanctions, I'm involved in a group called Sanctions Kill, which is a North American anti-sanctions organization opposing the pain caused in other countries by sanctions. Sanctions cause starvation, they cause death by illness, they cause unemployment, they cause inflation, and some countries which are very strongly hit presently by sanctions are Venezuela, Syria, and by ricochet Lebanon, Iran, where people do not get the medical needs satisfied. Salaries are virtually worthless because of the rampant inflation, and it's war by other means. It's not shooting guns coming from planes. It's stopping money from circulating, stopping countries from exporting. You're already under AGOA, which has affected and will affect Ethiopia, and they will be using this as a tool against your country to prevent them from developing. And you're all aware of, more than I, of the massive potential that your country has, in particular with electricity now. And they want to prevent your country from dealing with other countries, because we are in a situation of the multilateral world, and people watching world politics are very aware that, especially in Africa, but elsewhere also, you have an advantage to deal with other people than the US, other countries. You can make appropriate deals with Russia or China, Iran, and ironically, the UAR is something that comes up in this bill. And last week, a week and a half ago, the UAR abstained on the vote against the US against Russia. This is a phenomenon which, and most of Africa and most of the world, in fact, is not respecting the call for sanctions against Russia now. That is significant, because people who are handling countries like Ethiopia, like Nigeria, which has got even more people than Ethiopia, know that, you know, we in, say, Nigeria have an interest to deal with other people than only Canada and the US or Europe. So there's so much potential, and the US wants to use this bill to sanction your country for dealing with other countries. And this is a tremendous threat, which, again, I'm not Ethiopia. Ethiopia is sovereign. It'll have to decide. There's a very sophisticated leadership of economic and political leadership in your country, but you have to decide whether you're going to accept everything from the US or try and deal with other countries, and maybe including the US and Canada, that get the best deal.
All right. The connotation of this draft bill is imposing a sanction on Ethiopia because Ethiopia violated human rights, and it's all about crime against humanity, and genocide is happened. And the sanction is on the economy of the country, on the military, on the finance. How can comprehend these two different things? Would the violated human rights substituted with this sanction? Does that make sense to you?
Are you asking me? Yeah, well, I mean, they're using it as a reason. I mean, in war, there's going to be, of course, casualties, but there's no genocide. The Human Rights Commission already has confirmed that the genocide has not been committed in Tigray region as they supposed. So, I mean, the day that the TPLF attacked the Northern Command and Eritrea, the next day, the people went on digital media and said genocide. How did we go from an attack to genocide 24 hours? It's all made up. But they have somehow, because of the money that they looted from the country, somehow have convinced the West that it is a genocide, and it's not a genocide. The UN has already concluded that it's not. But what this will do is, number one, if they go through with this kind of sanction, it will halt the bilateral security and prosperity in the Horn of Africa. This is a very significant matter for the US. And the two is, it will really hinder the post-war reconstruction of Ethiopia. It will devastate locally and also in the Horn of Africa, and the pain extends beyond Eritrea to the entire region. So this is a very serious thing the Americans are playing with right now.
Okay, Ascal, thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Dear viewers, thank you for watching.